Hi there, hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com intelligence webinar produced in association with AdaptiveMobile. My name is Tim Skinner, I'm your moderator for today's webinar and I'm the content manager for Telecoms.com intelligence. Today's webinar will be examining mobile messaging grey routes, and we've got an expert from mobile security specialist AdaptiveMobile with us today. Simeon Coney will be looking into how messaging grey routes occur, why they are damaging for operators and how they are causing revenue leakage. He'll then go on to address what operators are able to do to mitigate the damage to profitability and customer experience, as well as helping to drive new and previously untapped revenues out of messaging. Simeon will round off the webinar with some real-world case studies which have generated significant financial benefit for mobile operators, and then go straight into a Q&A session. Before we start the webinar, first a little bit of information about today's presenter. Simeon is the SVP of AdaptiveMobile Security Practice and has 25 years experience within the telecoms industry in varying forms. He's been involved with marketing, product management, business development and operations roles at various telecoms infrastructure providers and ISVs, and has worked with many of the world's largest global carrier groups. He's been at AdaptiveMobile since its foundation and is currently responsible for the Managed Security Services practice. You're most certainly in good hands today with Simeon at the helm. After his presentation, we'll have some time for a written Q&A session with Simeon, where you can put forward any questions that you may have for him. To submit a question at any time, please use the dialog box found on the side of this page, and his answers will appear as text. And with that, I'll now hand over for Simeon's presentation. Simeon, it's over to you.
Thank you, Tim. So today I'll be talking about how operators can improve their revenues and profitability on A2P or commercial messaging. Operators today are being defrauded out of revenue streams for commercial messages. How? Well, interconnect operators are polluting interconnect traffic with traffic that is not person-to-person communication as per typical agreements. In addition, grey route providers are finding additional avenues to reach and get through to end users. And other parties are taking and making money from enterprises that should be compensated to operators for the usage of their network. This is the grey route traffic problem. And today I'm going to show you how AdaptiveMobile is helping operators achieve key goals for this. Firstly, how operators can gain intelligence to understand the traffic in their network and set appropriate business responses to these findings. How to achieve control over traffic that is violating their terms and conditions. And how to identify and prove the value that they and their partner aggregators uniquely bring that will encourage enterprises to drop the grey routes and purchase directly. So to achieve this, I'm going to cover the following topics, and we'll be taking questions at the end. We'll be looking at impact to operators' business models today. We'll be looking at how operators can actually take control over the market price for reaching through to their end users. What intelligence they can achieve with solutions like AdaptiveMobile to actually help them in the sales process, engaging with the enterprises. We'll be looking at what causes pollution and erosion to the current profitability of packages, and also looking at some new threats that have been emerging in their business. So let's start with an introduction to AdaptiveMobile. We have over 11 years' experience of being selected to deliver control and protection solutions for operators around the world. Today we're protecting over 1.3 billion subscribers worldwide, more than 1 in 6 mobile users today. We're detecting a huge volume of intelligence from this. Today we're blocking over 3 million attacks per day and seeing over 30 billion events. And from this we're actually helping protect over 200 global brands and enterprises in their deployment. And we've been successfully deployed in 9 out of the top 10 mobile operator groups worldwide. This gives us an unparalleled visibility into the approaches that the grey route brands and aggregators are using here to actually try and avoid detection and avoid control. So let's start by looking at what is a grey route. So grey routes are traffic which is in violation of an operator's terms and conditions regarding commercial messaging. And this is truly a global problem. We can see that many countries are naturally integrated and interacting with many other countries, but there is a pollution of this communication that's occurring. And so for every interconnect, there is a risk that that link could well be carrying grey route traffic. And as this animation shows, we are truly seeing grey routes occurring from the entire globe. So I would like to firstly gain your view of whether you feel there is an opportunity to win back this grey route traffic and generate additional revenues. I'd like you to answer with one of three responses. Firstly, that you think you can win this traffic back and gain additional price premiums by doing so. Or by winning the traffic back, but actually achieving only the same price points as the grey route markets are today. Or whether you feel actually that there are other aspects that you need to look at in terms of the battle against A2P erosion. So if you can make your voting selection now through the interactive box on the screen, we'll be looking at the results shortly. So in answer to the question, do you feel there is an opportunity to win this traffic back and generate additional revenues? We can see the results are as follows. So the first question is, why are grey routes a challenge now? Well, as Tim mentioned, we're seeing falling person-to-person generated SMS volumes. We're seeing increasingly generous consumer packages now for high-volume messages. It's possible to get unlimited international text messaging for something as low as $20 per month in certain territories. Yet what we're seeing, though, is an increase in application-generated traffic or commercial traffic. Why? Well, firstly, it's the one global method for reaching out to users. It is absolutely ubiquitous for reaching any individual in any network with any device. And we're seeing businesses are using this to address concerns in their own dealings with their customers. They're finding it the most effective mechanism to actually reach their end market. But the impact of this growth of A2P traffic means that operators are now starting to see pressures on their interconnect margin and also reducing profitability. And we'll be exploring the effect of this later on in this webinar. So let's look at the 6 areas of revenue loss that is impacting operators today. The first area is the traditionally known area, which is inbound international links. These are where traffic is coming in from origins typically abroad, typically in other continents, where the traffic is being polluted. So there is a mixture of clean person-to-person communication as well as application-generated content on that link. We also find that this traffic occurs even when operators have struck AA19 agreements such that they get compensation for the termination of this traffic. But what we see is that once those 2 areas are under control, the grey routes will move towards national interconnect, so it becomes a domestic rather than an international problem. And this is also driven by other market forces, such as speed of delivery. For example, in many countries, it is far faster for an enterprise to reach their customers by using long numbers rather than short codes, which typically have a 6 to 8 week lead time for procurement. But once that bear is under control, we then find grey routes move towards coming in through routes such as value-added service providers. This may be from partners who are either unaware that the traffic that they are aggregating is actually being contaminated, or where the traffic itself is not conforming to the agreed services or content struck with the operator. But also facing operators, there is a new area of impact, and this is the insider threat. What we're now seeing is increasingly SIM banks being used inside networks, firstly for targeting national outbound service gateways. So this is where the operator's own infrastructure is being used to deliver grey routes to their domestic partners. And also where this connectivity is being used on an international basis. So grey routes is not just an external problem, but it is also facing many operators for their internal base as well. And you can see that this creates quite a complex environment, and really an operator needs to protect every single one of these interactions. And AdaptiveMobile is unique in providing a protection that can address all these points of integration and interconnect. So let's look at where the money is flowing. So what we can see is that there are many large brands out there today who are successfully buying bulk volume of messages from aggregators and sub-aggregators. And many of these are legitimate businesses today. But what we can see is through the tiering of aggregators acquiring connectivity through to other markets, that there is an opportunity for grey route providers to be able to provide a cheaper route through to the end users. And this is how the grey routes come in. So it manifests itself to the operator that they see increased traffic coming in from international sources. So some operators will strike AA19 agreements. And what this means is at this point they will start to see a revenue stream where traditionally they've only had a cost base. And what we commonly observe is that this means operators are able to claim anywhere up to typically $1 million per annum, because they don't end up striking AA19 agreements with every single operator that can deliver traffic to their network. We also find that there's a market for SMS firewall-based grey route controls. This is where propositions where they will target the high-volume brands or the key brands with a revenue share proposition to the operator means that an operator can actually start to look at revenue streams anywhere between $1 to $3 million per annum, where they're cherry-picking particular brands that aggregators can strike a business relationship with. AdaptiveMobile's approach is that we enable operators to gain control over every single enterprise interaction with the network. And what this means is the operator is able to achieve the full revenue available to their brands and to the enterprises by being able to provide the appropriate connection either directly or through approved aggregators. And this means that operators can truly start to achieve the full revenue potential here. So let's see how operators can actually achieve this. So our recommendation is operators can make enterprises an offer that they truly can't refuse. How do they do this? Well, what they do is they actually be able to provide information on exactly who uses grey routes, how and for what, truly giving insight as to how to sell on areas that are critically important to the enterprises. And why should an enterprise listen? Well, because operators can now start to put in place controls to ensure that they can manage the only ingress routes through to those users, to ensure that no traffic gets through that violates their terms and conditions. So let's look at an example of what this actually would look like for a particular sector. Taking, for example, the banking sector. They're making increased use of A2P communication to reach to their customers. Why? Well, firstly, they're wanting to reduce fraud to their own business. They find that by providing notification to customers of transactions, it actually helps make the customer's more aware of any potential fraudulent activity on their account rather than waiting 30 days for their statement date. In addition, banks are using messaging for two-factor authentication, being able to send one-time passwords to users either whilst they're conducting transactions abroad or online. And lastly, banks are using messaging to also communicate to their customers in event of issue, because again, it's that ubiquitous mechanism to reach their customers. But what we do find is that it's commonly procurement departments that are buying these bulk messaging packs, and they're doing it from the cheapest possible source, which often means that grey routes are involved. So what does this actually mean to the enterprise then, to the bank? Well, let's look at what we observe as to the actual true sending behaviours of grey routes and banks. So taking the first of these, transaction notifications, these are sending personal customer information out about credit card details and transactions, times and amounts. And what we've observed is that frequently this information is being delivered via grey routes, and it's actually being carried outside of the country. And what this means is there's a violation of data protection compliancy, which is particularly of concern when you look at the origins being used. We found countries as diverse as Cambodia, Romania, Tonga, and even Cuba being used to provide a cheaper form of connectivity rather than keeping this traffic on net. So in terms of a sales proposition, this sort of intelligence operators can use to sell on-net routing to the compliancy officer in an enterprise bank rather than to the procurement department. Let's look at the second aspect of what banks use messaging for, which is the two-factor authentication. Again, an increasingly popular method to ensure that the banks themselves are not suffering fraud. But what we're finding is that actually blunt grey route controls in use in some networks mean that those messages are not getting through to the end user. That means the end user can't complete the transaction, and that's a revenue loss to the bank and significant customer dissatisfaction. So a proposition of being able to sell guaranteed delivery through valid routes to the customer care department of banks is again very, very important. And looking at the third area of how banks use messaging, which is customer communication. What we've seen is that banks are using this to notify in event of issues such as account deactivations. However, what they're doing is educating their customers to respond to this type of message, but without a guarantee that that message is truly coming from the bank. And thus what they've done is they've actually exposed themselves to significant phishing attacks on their customers. How is an end user supposed to know that this message is actually from their bank versus from an illegitimate source? And so selling protection to the fraud officer becomes, again, a very key value add that a bank can bring. And this isn't just theoretical concerns. What we're going to show you now is some visualizations of banking scams that we've actually measured over the past 6 months that are active and present today. And what we see is that there's actually a widespread use of this type of banking attack against individuals. It's targeted messaging that means individuals are far more likely to respond, and it's using a range of very sophisticated techniques to ensure the best possible response rate and take-up rates by the victims. So again, this is the type of intelligence that an operator can take to a bank along with the package of delivering control, guaranteed delivery, and compliancy to ensure that banks truly understand the value that a direct relationship with operators or approved aggregators bring versus grey routes. You can see from these visualizations that there is a wide set of very specific, very targeted attacks. They're looking at individual banks, individual brands, and they're ensuring that messages are being launched with identities that are plausible originations using local identities. And I would encourage you that if you're interested in more information on this, that you go to the Adaptive Mobile website where we have very comprehensive blog entries describing these attack profiles in more detail. not just the banking community that these messages resonate with. What we find is in any one network, we measure anywhere between 200 to 400 brands active using grey routes at any point in time. And all of their business sectors face these same challenges, whether it be retail, utilities, internet services, or other online services. They all suffer the same problems in terms of guaranteed delivery, in terms of compliancy, in terms of the need to ensure protection for their customers in delivering this, and that the operator is appropriately compensated for the delivery of the traffic. And as I mentioned before, a common approach to dealing with grey routes is for operators to strike AA19 agreements where they finally get paid some form of compensation for terminating traffic. But what we find is that in reality what that means is that the cost at the originator is actually increased, and that gets passed on to the grey routes. And that means the grey routes very quickly move to other origins. And so some examples here show how quickly we see complete swings in traffic profiles. So what were very quickly move to become also RANs. And operators can't be expected to chase AA19 agreements with all partners. So what AdaptiveMobile provide is content filtering, not source filtering. We help operators actually address the message, not the origin. What is interesting is also to see which particular services will remain on higher cost grey routes. So this actually helps operators understand which services and which brands have actually a greater tolerance to price increases, and this can be used to help set the most appropriate market price point for enterprise messaging. And I mentioned before that operators face an insider threat. So these are some real numbers that we pull out, commonly observe in our customer base. What we find is that where SIM banks are used, normally there's a control of anywhere between 300 to 400 devices under the control of a single individual. And they're very cleverly managed to keep the volume sending under the detection thresholds of the fraud systems inside operators. So from the chart on the left, you can notice the volume axis on the left-hand side here is logarithmic, that the majority of sending volume here is actually kept underneath the threshold of 100 messages per day, typically anywhere between 75 to 92, well in the legitimate band of legitimate customer usage. What's also interesting is if you look at the chart on the right, this illustrates how many messages were sent per SIM. And what you can see here is that there's a little blue dot shown on the vertical axis at point 25. So out of the 400 devices under control, 25 are actually being kept in reserve, such that when the primary high-volume sending devices are disconnected, these ones can be automatically brought up to speed. And you can also see there are also a range of devices being used, typically about 15 to 20, that are actually designed to push out very, very high volumes, typically 5 to 10,000 a day. And these work on the basis that many operators have a fairly slow cycle time to detect and disable. 24 hours means that the grey route source has a volume to push out many, many tens of thousands of messages before the device is disconnected, making them profitable. But the challenge for operators is how to defend against this, because perimeter-based approaches will not commonly see on-net originating traffic. And volumetrics, as we can see here, clearly don't work towards detecting this type of behavior. Again, it comes down to content filtering. AdaptiveMobile deliver per-message content-based control, giving operators surgical control over exactly the type of content that we know and detect to be grey route versus legitimate communication. And this approach means that we work faster than the grey route providers can. So irrespective of what source they use or how fast they move, we can always help operators deliver that complete control. It also enables operators to have a far more flexible business model to be able to choose exactly how and when and whom they actually control that traffic. And with this content-based approach, only Adaptive Mobile has automatic discovery of new content. Our system identifies new brands, new enterprises, new campaigns, new content, and new route sources automatically and can act on these immediately without user interaction. This means you can truly get fast, immediate, safe protection against the grey route threat. And only Adaptive Mobile have multi-bearer grey route control, which means that we can detect whether it's an international problem or domestic, whether it's an on-net problem or one of interconnect partners through SMPP. We provide integration and interconnect through all of these risk points in operators' networks. And what this approach means is that we can address the typical weaknesses of other solutions, which are just using source network blocking, whether it be using things like blocking global titles. How would an operator know where the grey routes are and when to block? How would they know what sender identity to control? How would they know what keyword to put in there? Or the implication of false positives of specifying the wrong keyword? And imbalance-based detection is, again, proven not to work. It's far too easy for grey route senders to hide or pollute the legitimate high-volume routes. And simple protocol checks, again, too easy to avoid via embedding in these legitimate routes. And we know these response cycles of working on 2, 3, 4, 5-day basis means that the grey routes can easily get their traffic in through under these thresholds here. And there's also, of course, the challenge of when would these routes be unblocked? Because blocking all traffic from a particular source means there is a very high consequential impact and revenue loss from all of the legitimate traffic. So what Adaptive Mobile do is enable operators to actually have a range of different business models. They can work on the basis of market lockout, where the only route through to subscribers is through those routes that the operator is actually appropriately commercially covered for. So any fraudulent attempt to bypass operators' charging can be addressed. We also enable operators to clean out those legitimate routes that have been polluted by a blend of person-to-person and application traffic on the same route. There is no need to terminate that entire connection, no need to lose that legitimate revenue for that legitimate communication. And we also give operators the intelligence to understand exactly which brands are using grey routes, such that they can achieve an appropriate selection of those brands for either direct sales or working with partner aggregators. And this means operators can pick out that whole long tail of all 400 brands, rather than just cherry-picking 2 or 3 and achieving a fraction of the actual true revenue potential. So in summary, Adaptive Mobile provide a wealth of intelligence given the visibility that we have across the globe on all these techniques. No one else has this visibility. Nobody else sees these attacks or these techniques being used as early on. And nobody else provides that level of control to help operators actually understand and manage the problem. So if you're interested and want to know more, we can actually help you understand the true size and cost of impact of grey route problem to your business today. We can analyze traffic and give you real numbers. We can actually help validate the business case to decide to deploy a solution. We can help you understand exactly which brands, campaigns, volumes, and sources, and validate that you have a problem and understand the ROI on implementing a solution. And also, we can help you identify the best business model to address your needs. So to achieve this, if you contact us on email at sales.adaptivemobile.com, and we will help you qualify your revenue opportunity.
Well, Simeon, thanks very much indeed for your presentation. There's some very interesting opportunities for operators, it seems. And with that, I'd now like to invite questions from the audience in this written Q&A session. Should you have any queries at all, just use the dialog box on this page. Simeon's answers will appear as text in the comment stream. So it just remains for me to thank Simeon and AdaptiveMobile for making today's webinar possible, and thank you also to everyone who tuned in today. Please do look out for future webinars addressing subjects close to the heart of the telecoms industry on Telecoms.com. See you again next time.